This bisexual mistress of Charles II not only went on to seduce his daughter, she also had a scandalous duel with her. This is Hortense Mancini, and despite being best known for her sexuality, she was far more than a mistress. Born in Rome in 1646, Hortense actually first came to England after fleeing an incredibly abusive marriage to a very unstable husband. There is quite the tale to tell before we get to that point though, so let me acquaint you with this fascinating woman's life. Hortense was about 15 when she married her husband in 1661, and as I say, the marriage was a very unhappy one. He was an incredibly cruel man. He insisted on knocking out all of the front teeth of the female servants to render them unattractive to men. And he'd conduct nighttime raids on Hortense's room, and he forbade her to spend any time with any men. As well as this, he ordered that she spend a quarter of each day at prayer. During this time, however, Hortense began an affair with a lady called Sidonie. It would take several more escape attempts and help from her siblings for Hortense to finally break free from her husband. But in 1668 she managed, and Louis XIV of France even stood in as her protector. So for some time after this, Hortense lived in Savoy, being provided for by one of her old suitors, the Duke of Savoy. Here she could enjoy a much more free life. She would often dress up in men's clothing, and she hosted writers and intellectuals. Perhaps unsurprisingly though, on the Duke's death, his widow ordered Hortense to leave, and so she was once again cast out with little means and no money. Hortense was nothing if not resourceful though. After acquainting herself with the English ambassador to France, the pair hatched a plan to replace Charles II's current mistress, Louise de Querouaix, with Hortense. And this was mutually beneficial because it would increase Ralph Montague, the English ambassador's influence with Charles, and obviously for Hortense it would be beneficial in terms of extra income and influence. Also in terms of getting away from the clutches of her husband, of course. And so in 1675, Hortense travelled to London, and she was already a bit of a minor celebrity here because she had published her memoirs. She was also famed for her wit and her beauty, so she attracted a lot of attention anyway. By mid-1676, she had replaced Louise as Charles's primary mistress, and she had a very healthy pension of £4,000 settled on her. Mission accomplished, we might think, but of course the story doesn't end there. Unfortunately, such favour wasn't to last, and Hortense's decline in power was in large part due to her reputation for promiscuity. Charles was not pleased when he found out that Hortense was involved in an affair with his illegitimate daughter, Anne, Countess of Suffolk, which, to be fair, is, that's fair. And this is where the duel comes in. So Anne and Hortense had taken part in a kind of a mock duel. They weren't actually trying to kill each other. In the very early morning in just their shifts, so basically their underwear. And this was in a park, so quite public. Anne was married, and as you can imagine, her husband wasn't best pleased either. After the duel, Anne was banished to the country, and it is actually quite sad because it seems that she really took a shine to Hortense. It said that while she was in the country, she just stayed in bed all day crying and kissing a miniature of her lost lover. When Charles discovered a further affair between Hortense and the Prince of Monaco, it was a step too far for him, and he cut off her pension. He must have had some regard for her though, because this was later reinstated and the two did reunite as friends, which I think is really nice. And this friendship lasted right up until Charles's death. Before too long, Louise was reinstalled as primary mistress, but by now Hortense was firmly established in society in England. Early modern writer Aphra Behn actually wrote a dedication to Hortense in her The History of the Nun, and this is read by some historians as evidence for a relationship between the two. Hortense continued to encourage art and intellectualism in her own salon, where science and literature were frequently discussed. And her salon really became quite a staple, so through Charles II's death, James II's exile, and the installation of William and Mary as joint monarchs, the salon continued. And it was an inclusive space where women were hosted as well as men. Perhaps surprisingly, Louise actually attended, so maybe they became friends. I guess they'd have something in common. And there were others who attended who'd also been mistresses of Charles II, including Nell Gwynn and Barbara Villiers. Hortense died at the age of around 53 in 1699. There was some speculation that she took her own life. John Evelyn, the diarist, wrote that she was reported to have hastened her death by intemperate drinking strong spirits. And this bit is really horrible, but tragically Hortense's husband still had this innate wish to control her, even after all those years. He acquired her body and travelled around France with it before finally allowing a burial next to her uncle. Despite this sad end, I think it's really important to remember Hortense as a vibrant, resilient, social person. She led an incredibly dramatic life and was clearly a woman of much character, far more than a mistress.